Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling cases ever recorded in the history of Arkansas. Before we proceed, I encourage you to drop a comment, letting us know where you're tuning in from and the exact time you're hearing this narrative. We're curious to learn where and during what hours of the day or night these documented stories are being received. The Hollowwood case of 1907 remains a deeply puzzling enigma in the chronicles of Arkansas. It starts with a plain fact. On October 12, 1907, the entire Caldwell family of Hollowwoods, a small lumber settlement nestled deep within the Ozark Mountains, disappeared without any explanation. Their absence might have gone unnoticed for weeks were it not for the livestock. 3 horses and 7 chickens, discovered dead in their pens, not from wounds, but from clear starvation. What rendered this case especially disturbing wasn't simply the disappearance itself, but rather what was abandoned behind. The Caldwell home, a substantial 2-story timber structure erected by Thomas Caldwell himself, was discovered unlocked with dinner plates still arranged on the table. A pot of stew sat half-eaten. The beds were made. The family Bible rested open to the book of Revelation. Most unnerving of all was the parlor mirror, which had been carefully draped with a black cloth, a custom normally reserved for when death had visited a household. County records indicate the family comprised Thomas Caldwell, 42, his wife Margaret, 38, and Thomas's brother Edwin, 39. The 3 had relocated to Arkansas from Pennsylvania in 1901, purchasing 80 acres of densely forested land from the railroad company. By all accounts from neighboring homesteads, they were reserved but courteous. Thomas ran a small lumber mill supplying timber to nearby towns. Margaret was recognized for her herbal remedies and tinctures. Edwin, described in tax documents as a bachelor invalid, seldom ventured beyond the property lines. What ensued after their disappearance was an investigation plagued by inconsistencies, misleading leads, and what some would later characterize as deliberate hindrance. This is the account of that investigation, the hypotheses it spawned, and the shadow it continues to throw over Carroll County to this day. A shadow that reaches across decades of quiet, murmurs, and fearful glances whenever the Caldwell name is spoken in certain corners of the Ozarks. The land where Hollowwoods once stood has long since been taken back by the forest. No markers indicate where the Caldwell home stood. No monuments commemorate what transpired there. The county records concerning the case were purportedly stored in the courthouse basement until 1952, when flooding damaged numerous documents. What survives now are scattered newspaper clippings, a handful of personal letters, and the oral traditions handed down by those who lived nearby. Stories told in hushed voices around winter fires. Stories that invariably start with a warning: some truths are better left buried in the deep woods of Arkansas. Before their disappearance, the Caldwell family had established themselves as respectable, if somewhat reclusive, members of the rural community. Thomas Caldwell was characterized in a 1905 business directory as industrious and of sound character. The small lumber operation he managed employed 3 local men on a seasonal basis. According to ledgers discovered in his office, the business was modestly profitable, though not exceptional in its success. The homestead itself sat nearly 3 miles from the nearest neighbor, the Patterson farm, accessible only by a narrow dirt road that became almost impassable during heavy rains. This isolation was typical for the region at the time, but several accounts indicate the Caldwells prized their privacy more than most. Margaret Caldwell made monthly trips into the nearest town, Berryville, for supplies and to sell her herbal preparations, which were reportedly in high demand for various ailments. She never lingered for social engagements. Edwin Caldwell remains the most puzzling of the 3. County physician Dr. R. James Merritt noted in his records that he visited the Caldwell property twice in 1904 to attend to Edwin, who suffered from what was described only as a nervous affliction resulting from war experiences. Edwin had served briefly in the Spanish-American War and, according to Thomas's correspondence with a former business associate in Pennsylvania, had returned changed in spirit and constitution. What exactly this change entailed was never explicitly stated. The Patterson family, their closest neighbors, later testified that in the months leading up to the disappearance, they had noticed oddities at the Caldwell property. Samuel Patterson, the family patriarch, reported hearing mechanical sounds, like metal on metal, coming from the direction of the Caldwell land at night on at least 3 occasions during the summer of 1907. His wife, Eleanor, mentioned that Margaret had stopped bringing her customary herbal preparations when visiting, claiming she had dedicated her garden to a special project. Perhaps most telling was an encounter described by Robert Finch, a traveling salesman who visited the Caldwell property approximately 2 weeks before the family vanished. In a statement given to the county sheriff, Finch recalled being greeted at the door by Thomas, who appeared unshaven and distracted, though Finch had previously been welcomed inside during his quarterly visits. On this occasion, Thomas conducted their business on the porch. Finch reported hearing what he described as a low, continuous humming sound from within the house. When he inquired about it, Thomas abruptly ended their meeting, saying only, "We've found something in the woods, Mr. Finch. Something that changes everything." The Caldwell family's daily routines had been established over their 6 years in Arkansas. Thomas typically rose before dawn to begin work at his small sawmill. Margaret tended to her extensive herb garden and prepared the family's meals. Edwin, despite his condition, kept the household accounts with meticulous precision. Their lives followed the predictable rhythms of rural existence until something disrupted that rhythm. According to a letter Margaret wrote to her sister in Ohio, dated August 24, 1907, one of the last known communications from the family, Thomas had begun spending considerable time exploring a section of their property, known locally as the Narrows, a steep ravine cutting through the eastern portion of their land. Margaret's letter mentioned that Thomas had discovered something of significance, but provided no details, stating only that he had sworn her to secrecy until he could verify certain facts. This letter takes on particular importance when considered alongside an entry in Thomas's business ledger from September 3, 1907. Mill operations suspended indefinitely. All resources dedicated to excavation project. No further explanation was provided, but the 3 seasonal workers employed by Thomas confirmed they were paid in full and told their services would not be needed for the foreseeable future. The final documented interaction with the Caldwells came on October 9, 1907, just days before their disappearance was discovered. Jeremiah Ellis, the postal carrier who serviced the rural routes, delivered a package to the Caldwell home. In his statement to authorities, Ellis recalled that the package was unusually heavy for its size and bore no return address, only a postal mark from Washington, D.C. Margaret, who accepted the delivery, appeared uncommonly agitated and asked Ellis if he had noticed anyone following him on his route. When Ellis responded in the negative, she nodded and said, "They'll come soon enough, but we'll be ready." Ellis was the last known person to see any member of the Caldwell family alive. What transpired in the 3 days between Ellis's visit and the family's disappearance remains unknown. No storms were recorded in the area that might have prompted evacuation. No family emergencies were reported that could explain a sudden departure. The Caldwells simply vanished, leaving behind almost everything they owned, including items of significant value, such as Margaret's silver hairbrush set, a gift from her father, which was found on her dressing table. The discovery of the Caldwell's absence came on October 17, 1907, when Samuel Patterson, concerned by the unusual silence from the neighboring property, rode over to investigate. Finding the abandoned house and deceased livestock, Patterson immediately returned home and dispatched his eldest son to Berryville to alert the authorities. Sheriff William Hargrove arrived the following morning with 2 deputies. Their initial search of the property revealed several peculiarities beyond those already observed by Patterson. In his official report, Hargrove noted that, while the house showed no signs of struggle or violence, there were indications of hasty departure. A woman's shawl hung on a hook by the door. A pipe, apparently Thomas's, lay still packed with tobacco on his desk. Most puzzling was a series of marks found scratched into the wooden floor of the kitchen. Symbols that Hargrove described as, or like any alphabet or numerical system known to me. The cellar door was found locked and, when forced open, revealed a space transformed from its original purpose. The food storage shelves had been emptied and pushed against one wall. A large table occupied the center of the room, covered with papers bearing more of the strange symbols found in the kitchen. In one corner stood what Hargrove described as a contraption of brass and copper, cylindrical in shape, approximately 3 feet in height, with numerous dials and a cranking mechanism. No one present could identify its purpose. The search extended to the lumber mill, which showed signs of having been converted to some other use. The saw blades had been removed from their mounts, and various metal parts appeared to have been repurposed. A blacksmith's forge had been installed in one corner, an addition not typically found in small lumber operations. Most notably, the mill's water wheel had been modified with an elaborate system of gears and belts that led to a device similar to the one found in the cellar. It was at this point that the investigation took its first unusual turn. According to Deputy Michael Collins's personal journal, discovered among his effects after his death in 1946, Sheriff Hargrove received a visitor while the search of the property was still underway. A man who identified himself as James Colton from the Department of the Interior. No official record of this visit exists in the sheriff's report, but Collins described Colton as a thin man of middle years, dressed too finely for our country surroundings, who spoke with authority and presented papers that seemed to satisfy the sheriff completely. Following Colton's arrival, the focus of the investigation shifted dramatically. Rather than continuing to search for the missing family, Hargrove instructed his men to collect all papers, journals, and the strange devices found in the cellar and mill. These items were loaded into Colton's carriage, and by nightfall, the government representative had departed with virtually all physical evidence from the scene. The official investigation was closed 3 days later with a notation in county records stating only that the Caldwell family is presumed to have abandoned their property voluntarily for reasons unknown. No further action was taken by local authorities. This might have remained the official narrative had it not been for a discovery made the following spring by a local hunter, Elias Thornton. While tracking deer in a remote section of what had been the Caldwell property, Thornton came upon a small clearing that showed signs of recent excavation. At the center of this clearing was what he described as perfect circle of blackened earth, approximately 15 feet in diameter, within which nothing grew. Surrounding this circle were more of the strange symbols, this time carved into the trunks of the encircling trees. Thornton reported his find to Sheriff Hargrove, who allegedly told him to forget what he had seen and to stay away from the former Caldwell land. According to Thornton's account, published years later in the Berryville Gazette, Hargrove appeared frightened by the information and mentioned that government men had instructed him to report any findings related to the Caldwell case directly to them. Bypassing normal procedures, the clearing discovered by Thornton could not be located by subsequent searchers, leading many to dismiss his account as fabrication. However, his description of the strange symbols matched those in Hargrove's original report, which had not been made public, a fact that lends credibility to his claim. For nearly 50 years, the Caldwell disappearance remained a subject of local speculation, but little formal investigation. The property was eventually reclaimed by the county for unpaid taxes and sold to a timber company, which harvested the valuable hardwoods but never developed the land. The house and mill fell into ruin, victims of weather and scavengers. By the 1940s, little remained to indicate that the Caldwells had ever lived there at all. Local folklore began to incorporate elements of the mystery. Stories circulated about strange lights seen above the former Caldwell property on moonless nights. Hunters reported disorientation when passing through certain areas of the woods, claiming that compasses would spin uselessly and watches would stop working. Some spoke of hearing voices carried on the wind, whispers in what was described as a language that sounds almost like English, but isn't. These tales might be dismissed as typical rural superstition were it not for their specificity and consistency over decades. Moreover, they bear striking similarities to phenomena reported by the Pattersons and other neighbors prior to the Caldwells' disappearance, suggesting either remarkable continuity in local folklore or the persistence of whatever anomalous conditions first attracted Thomas Caldwell's attention in 1907. The case received unexpected attention when Professor Harold Jenkins of the University of Arkansas began researching what he termed anomalous historical incidents in the Ozark region. Jenkins, a historian with an interest in folklore, came across references to the Caldwell disappearance and began collecting oral histories from elderly residents who remembered the events of 1907. What emerged was a more complex narrative than the official record suggested. Multiple accounts mentioned strange lights seen in the sky above the Caldwell property in the weeks before the family vanished. Others recalled unusual weather patterns, localized storms that seemed to center on the area around the Caldwell land. Several people interviewed by Jenkins spoke of Margaret Caldwell's increasing paranoia during her final visits to town, including her purchase of an unusually large quantity of salt and iron nails from the general store. Most significantly, Jenkins uncovered a journal kept by Dr. James Merritt, the county physician who had treated Edwin Caldwell. In an entry dated September 28, 1907, approximately 2 weeks before the family's disappearance, Merritt wrote, "Called to Caldwell residents regarding E.C.'s condition. Found patient in state of extreme agitation, claiming to hear voices from the hole. T.C. refused to allow examination of excavation site, stating matter was under government purview. Observed unusual apparatus in barn. T.C. described it as a receiver for frequencies beyond normal perception. Prescribed sedative for E.C., but doubt its efficacy against whatever truly afflicts him." This journal entry suggests that the excavation project mentioned in Thomas's business ledger had yielded something significant enough to cause Edwin severe distress and to warrant government interest. Yet, what exactly had been discovered remains unknown. Another intriguing document, uncovered by Jenkins, was a letter from Thomas Caldwell to a former colleague at the Pennsylvania Lumber Company, where he had previously worked. Dated September 15, 1907, the letter contained a passage that has been much analyzed by those interested in the case. What we have found defies conventional understanding. The mathematics involved are unlike anything taught in our universities. Edwin believes we have stumbled upon something ancient beyond reckoning. Yet the precision suggests intelligence, rather than natural formation. The vibrations emanating from the chamber affect metal objects in proximity. Watches run backward. Compass needles point to the chamber rather than north. I have constructed a device to measure and perhaps harness these emanations, though I confess I understand only fragments of the principles involved. It is as if knowledge is being transmitted directly to my mind when I stand within the circle. This letter suggests that something would have discovered affected the normal functioning of certain tools and he was an study and instruments. Properties he was due to possibly utilized through devices of his own construction. The reference to knowledge being transmitted directly to my mind is particularly troubling, suggesting either a psychological effect from whatever phenomenon he was investigating or, more disturbingly, some form of external influence on his thought processes. Jenkins's research came to an abrupt end in October 1957, when he suffered what official records describe as a cerebral hemorrhage while working alone in his university office. His notes on the Caldwell case were never located despite inquiries from colleagues. The university declined to pursue his research, and the case once again faded from public attention. In the decades that followed, the Caldwell disappearance joined the ranks of regional mysteries. Stories told around campfires, embellished with each retelling, gradually transforming from historical incident to local legend. The land where the Caldwell home once stood became known as Whisper Hollow to locals, who claimed that on certain nights, particularly when the moon was new, strange sounds could be heard emanating from the depths of the forest. Sounds described variously as mechanical humming, whispered conversations in unknown languages, or the rhythmic turning of great gears beneath the earth. Several attempts were made by amateur historians and paranormal investigators to locate the site of the excavation mentioned in Thomas's records, but none proved successful. The landscape had changed significantly over the decades, with the original landmarks referenced in county surveys long since gone or altered beyond recognition. The absence of reliable maps of the original Caldwell property compounds the difficulty, as the survey records were among those damaged in the courthouse flooding of 1952. The case might have remained solely in the realm of folklore had it not been for a series of declassified government documents released in 1967 under the Freedom of Information Act. Among these was a brief but significant memorandum dated October 12, 1907, the very day the Caldwells are believed to have vanished, from someone identified only as J.C., possibly the James Colton mentioned in Deputy Collins's journal to the director of the newly formed Bureau of Investigation, forerunner to the FBI. The memorandum, heavily redacted, contained the following legible text: situation at Caldwell site contained as instructed. All materials secured. Subjects relocated to redacted facility for debriefing regarding the artifact and its properties. Recommend highest level classification for this matter, as findings may have significant implications for national security. Local authorities have been instructed to cease investigation with cover story of voluntary abandonment. This document, though brief, confirms several key points. Government involvement in the Caldwell case from its earliest stages. The existence of some form of artifact discovered by the family, and a deliberate effort to suppress information about what had occurred. Most importantly, it suggests that the Caldwells did not meet with foul play, but were instead taken into government custody, though for what purpose and what ultimately became of them remains unclear. A second declassified document, dated November 3, 1907, provides additional context. This report, authored by someone identified only as Scientific Advisor R, states, "Preliminary analysis confirms Caldwell's device functions as described, though his understanding of the principles involved was incomplete. The artifact itself appears to be of manufactured origin, though the materials and methods of construction are inconsistent with current technological capabilities. Carbon dating suggests an age of approximately her redacted years, which, if accurate, would place its origin well before known human civilization in North America." Subject T. Caldwell claims the mathematical principles were revealed to him while in proximity to the artifact. Recommend continued isolation of all subjects and transport of the artifact to more secure facility for comprehensive analysis. This document raises troubling questions about the nature of what Thomas Caldwell discovered. The reference to manufactured origin suggests something created rather than naturally occurring, while the apparent age places it outside the conventional understanding of North American history. Most disturbing is the implication that the artifact somehow influenced Caldwell's thought processes, revealing mathematical principles to him through some unknown mechanism. Attempts by researchers and journalists to obtain further information have consistently met with denial or claims that no additional records exist. The land itself has changed hands multiple times over the decades, eventually becoming part of the Ozark National Forest in 1962. Forest Service personnel have reported no unusual findings in the area, though it should be noted that the exact location of the original Caldwell property is now difficult to determine due to changes in local geography and landmarks. For most of those who study the case today, the central question is not what happened to the Caldwell family. The declassified memorandum suggests they were taken by government agents, but rather what they discovered on their property that warranted such extraordinary measures. The strange devices described in Sheriff Hargrove's report, the symbols found scratched into floors and trees, the excavation site, the artifact mentioned in the memorandum, all point to something well beyond the ordinary concerns of rural Arkansas in 1907. Various theories have emerged over the years. Some suggest Thomas Caldwell, an educated man with an interest in geology, discovered an unusual meteorite or mineral deposit with properties that attracted government attention. Others believe the family may have stumbled upon evidence of previous inhabitants in the area, perhaps ancient structures or artifacts that challenged conventional historical understanding. A more extreme interpretation, popular among certain fringe researchers, holds that the frequencies beyond normal perception mentioned in Dr. Merritt's journal suggest the Caldwells had discovered evidence of non-human intelligence, either ancient or extraterrestrial in origin. Proponents of this theory point to the strange symbols, the circular clearing found by Thornton, and the government's swift intervention and subsequent classification of the matter. The possibility that the Caldwells discovered something of genuine archaeological significance cannot be dismissed entirely. The Ozark region has a rich indigenous history, with evidence of human habitation dating back thousands of years. Could Thomas Caldwell have uncovered some artifact from a previously unknown ancient civilization, one with technological capabilities beyond what conventional archaeology attributes to pre-Columbian North America? Whatever the truth, the Caldwell case stands as a reminder that even in the supposedly well-documented modern era, mysteries remain, events that slipped through the cracks of official history, leaving behind only fragments and whispers for future generations to interpret. In 1968, an elderly man named Joseph Caldwell arrived in Berryville, claiming to be a distant cousin of the vanished family. According to local newspaper accounts, he spent several weeks in the area interviewing older residents and visiting county offices to review what records remained. Before departing, he reportedly told the proprietor of the boarding house where he stayed that he had found what he was looking for. Though he declined to elaborate, no record exists of Joseph Caldwell's findings, if any, and attempts to trace him through genealogical records have proven inconclusive. Some speculate he may have been a government agent sent to assess what local memory of the incident remained after 6 decades. Others suggest he might have been seeking information about relatives he genuinely believed had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. One curious detail from Joseph Caldwell's visit, reported by the boarding house proprietor in a subsequent interview with a local historian, was his particular interest in the strange symbols mentioned in accounts of the case. He reportedly carried a small notebook containing similar markings, which he compared with those described by locals who remembered the original investigation. When asked about their meaning, he allegedly replied, "They're not a language as we understand it. They're mathematical expressions, equations describing relationships that conventional mathematics couldn't capture in 1907. This statement, if accurately reported, suggests that Joseph Caldwell possessed knowledge about the symbols that went beyond what was publicly available, raising questions about his true identity and connection to the case. The boarding house proprietor also mentioned that Joseph seemed unusually interested in local reports of electronic equipment malfunctioning in certain areas of the forest, asking specifically about anomalous electromagnetic readings, terminology that would have been somewhat specialized for a layperson in 1968. The land where the Caldwell home once stood remains undeveloped to this day, a densely wooded area within the national forest. Hikers occasionally report feelings of unease when passing through, though whether this stems from knowledge of the area's history or some more tangible influence is impossible to determine. Park rangers acknowledge the stories, but attribute them to the power of suggestion and the natural disorientation that can occur in dense woodland. In 1973, a group of university students camping in the general vicinity reported experiencing strange dreams on 3 consecutive nights. Dreams in which they found themselves wandering through underground chambers marked with symbols similar to those described in the Caldwell case. None of the students had prior knowledge of the story, making this shared experience particularly noteworthy. Upon learning of the historical connection to their campsite, they attempted to locate any unusual features in the surrounding area, but found nothing conclusive. In 2002, an archaeological survey was conducted in the general vicinity as part of a broader study of early 20th century settlements in the Ozarks. The team reported finding scattered foundation stones, consistent with the dimensions of the Caldwell home as described in county records, along with fragments of period-appropriate ceramics and metalwork. They noted no anomalous findings, though their survey was not specifically focused on the mystery surrounding the family's disappearance. One member of the team, however, later reported in an unofficial capacity that their electronic equipment, including GPS devices and digital cameras, experienced unexpected failures during portions of the survey, particularly in a ravine area that might have corresponded to the narrows mentioned in Margaret Caldwell's letter. This equipment functioned normally when removed from the area, only to malfunction again when brought back, behavior consistent with strong electromagnetic interference. No source for such interference was identified. One curious footnote to the story emerged in 1965, when a nursing home resident in Springfield, Missouri, claimed to be Edwin Caldwell, the elderly man whose actual identity was never conclusively established, told attendants that he and his family had been taken by government men after his brother had opened a door that should have remained closed. He spoke of years spent in a facility where asked questions about what we had heard and seen, but we refused for details and eventually refused to discuss the matter further. He died in 1966, taking whatever knowledge he possessed to the grave. Medical records from the nursing home described the man as suffering from persistent auditory hallucinations and paranoid delusions regarding government surveillance. However, a notation in his file indicates that he was able to draw the same strange symbols described in the original Caldwell case, symbols that had never been reproduced in any publicly available documentation. This curious fact suggests either that he was indeed connected to the Caldwell family or that he had somehow gained access to restricted information about the case. For those fascinated by historical mysteries, the Caldwell case offers a tantalizing blend of documented fact and enduring enigma. The family's disappearance is a matter of record. The government's interest, confirmed by declassified documents, suggests something beyond ordinary criminal investigation. Yet, the nature of what the Caldwells discovered and their ultimate fate remains shrouded in uncertainty. Perhaps this is fitting. The Ozarks have always been a place where the line between the known and unknown seems particularly thin, where ancient forests conceal their secrets, where isolation breeds both independence and peculiarity, where stories pass from generation to generation, changing subtly with each telling until fact and folklore become indistinguishable. Today, those who visit the area where the Caldwell family once lived find only trees, underbrush, and the occasional stone that might once have been part of a foundation or chimney. Whatever was discovered there in 1907, whatever prompted a family to vanish and a government to intervene, has left no visible trace. Only the story remains, preserved in fragments of official record, personal recollection, and persistent rumor. And perhaps, on certain nights, when the forest falls unnaturally silent, something else remains as well. An echo of whatever strange discovery prompted Thomas Caldwell to write those final cryptic words in his ledger. We stand at the threshold of understanding. God help us if we are right. In the summer of 1963, a geology student named Michael Hardin, conducting field research in the Ozarks, reported finding an unusual rock formation in an area believed to be near the former Caldwell property. Hardin described a circular arrangement of stones, each marked with symbols similar to those mentioned in Sheriff Hargrove's original report. At the center of the circle was a depression in the earth that Hardin initially took to be a sinkhole, common in the karst landscape of the region. Upon closer examination, however, Hardin noticed that the depression had unusually smooth sides, as if bored rather than eroded, and extended to a depth beyond what his equipment could measure. Most intriguingly, he reported hearing what he described as mechanical sounds, like clockwork, emanating from deep within the hole. Hardin marked the location on his map and intended to return with better equipment. But when he tried to find the site again 3 days later, he was unable to locate it despite extensive searching. Hardin's account might be dismissed as the product of overactive imagination were it not for two factors: his academic credentials and reputation for reliability, and the fact that he had no prior knowledge of the Caldwell case when he made his report. He learned of the connection only when his professor, recognizing the similarity to elements of the old mystery, shared what little information was available in university archives. Hardin never located the site again despite several attempts. His experience, documented in a brief article in the Journal of Ozark Studies in 1964, represents one of the few first-hand accounts of anomalous findings in the area since the original disappearance. The article attracted little attention at the time of its publication, but has since become a key reference for those interested in the Caldwell mystery. Particularly notable is Hardin's detailed description of the symbols found on the stone circle. The markings appeared to be incised with great precision, each approximately 3 inches in height and consisting of complex geometric patterns interwoven with what resembled mathematical notations, though not any mathematical system I recognized from my studies. The overall effect was one of extraordinary complexity and yet perfect internal consistency, as if representing some comprehensive theoretical framework. This description bears striking similarities to the symbols described in Sheriff Hargrove's original report, and later by the man claiming to be Edwin Caldwell in the nursing home, suggesting some continuity in whatever phenomenon the Caldwell family encountered in 1907. In 1967, following the declassification of the government memorandum mentioning the Caldwell case, journalist Rebecca Turner attempted to trace what had happened to the family after their removal from the property. Her investigation led her to records of a facility called the Special Research Division that had operated under the Department of War from 1907 to 1915 in a remote area of western Maryland. The facility was ostensibly dedicated to the development of communications technology, but Turner uncovered evidence suggesting its actual purpose was the study of unconventional scientific discoveries with potential military applications. Personnel records for the facility were largely destroyed in a fire in 1929, but Turner managed to locate a former administrative clerk who recalled 3 individuals matching the Caldwells, descriptions being housed there as special consultants, rather than as traditional staff. According to this source, who requested anonymity, the 3 lived in a separate building under constant supervision and worked exclusively with a team of government scientists on a project involving sound waves or vibrations of some kind. The source could provide no information or long the Caldwells remained at the facility, or what ultimately became of them. Turner's attempts to pursue this lead further were stymied by government officials who denied any knowledge of the Special Research Division, despite the documentary evidence of its existence. Her subsequent Freedom of Information Act requests were denied on grounds of national security, and she reported being subjected to surveillance and veiled threats that eventually led her to abandon the investigation. Turner's experience points to continued government sensitivity about the Caldwell case even 6 decades after the events in question, a fact that only deepens the mystery surrounding what exactly was discovered in those Arkansas woods in 1907. One detail from Turner's investigation that has received relatively little attention is her discovery of a death certificate for a Margaret Caldwell dated June 17, 1913, in Montgomery County, Maryland, near the location of the alleged Special Research Division facility. The cause of death was listed as natural causes, with no specific ailment indicated. The woman's age was given as 44 years, which would align with Margaret Caldwell's age at that time. However, no corresponding death certificates for Thomas or Edwin Caldwell have ever been located. If this document does indeed refer to the Margaret Caldwell from Hollow Woods, it suggests that at least she survived for nearly 6 years after the family's disappearance from Arkansas. What became of her husband and brother-in-law remains unknown. The absence of graves or burial records further complicates the matter, as if the Caldwells, having vanished from history once, continued to leave no trace even in death. The most recent chapter in the Caldwell saga began in 1968 when a package arrived at the office of Dr. Elias Montgomery, a physicist at MIT known for his unconventional theories regarding what he termed vibrational physics. The package, postmarked from Berryville, Arkansas, contained no return address and included only a handwritten note saying, "You might understand what Thomas Caldwell found," along with a collection of papers. Montgomery described them as simultaneously primitive and advanced, as if someone with limited formal education had been attempting to describe quantum-level phenomena using the scientific language of 1907. Most striking was a detailed drawing of a device labeled simply as the receiver, a mechanism that, according to Montgomery's analysis, appeared designed to detect and possibly amplify vibrations existing outside the normal spectrum of human perception. The design incorporated principles that would not become part of mainstream physics until decades later, including concepts similar to quantum entanglement and field theory. These papers, which Montgomery later verified as dating from the early 20th century, based on the composition of the ink and paper, contained diagrams and equations unlike any conventional scientific notation of the period. Montgomery's attempts to construct a working model based on the diagrams were unsuccessful, as key elements of the design seemed to rely on materials or processes not specified in the documentation. Nevertheless, he became convinced that Thomas Caldwell had somehow developed theoretical frameworks decades ahead of their time, possibly as a result of whatever he had discovered on his property. The physicist published his preliminary analysis in an obscure scientific journal in 1969, but found his academic reputation damaged by what colleagues viewed as an excursion into pseudoscience. The original papers sent to Montgomery were not found among his effects, and his family reported that in his final years, he became increasingly paranoid, claiming to be under surveillance and speaking of frequencies that carry messages across time and space. A colleague who visited Montgomery in his final months later wrote that the physicist had begun to experience what he described as auditory phenomena, similar to those reported by Edwin Caldwell, voices that seemed to emanate from nowhere. Voices emanating from nowhere, speaking in what Montgomery described as a language of pure mathematics. Whether these experiences represented genuine perception of some external phenomenon, as Montgomery believed, or were symptoms of mental deterioration remains a matter of speculation. He subsequently withdrew from public life, continuing his research privately until his death in 1975. The Caldwell case intersects with several other mysteries and anomalies reported in the Ozark region over the decades. Local folklore has long included accounts of dead zones, where compasses fail and electronic equipment malfunctions, areas where time seems to pass at a different rate, and locations where unusual sounds can be heard under certain conditions, typically described as mechanical or rhythmic in nature. While such reports are common in many rural areas with strong oral traditions, the consistency of these accounts across generations and their similarity to phenomena reportedly associated with the Caldwell case raise the possibility of some underlying reality behind the folklore. Could these stories represent encounters with the same phenomenon that the Caldwell family discovered and attempted to study? And if so, what exactly is that phenomenon? Is it possible that Thomas Caldwell, a man with no formal scientific training, stumbled upon some natural phenomenon that granted him insights into physics that were decades ahead of his time? Did the strange symbols found at the property represent an attempt to transcribe information received through this phenomenon? And if so, what was the source of this information, and why did it prompt such decisive government intervention? These questions remain unanswered and perhaps unanswerable. What can be said with certainty is that in the autumn of 1907, something occurred at a remote homestead in the Arkansas Ozarks. something significant enough to cause 3 people to vanish from history and to generate ripples of consequence that continue to be felt more than half a century later. For those who have studied the case most closely, a particular detail often stands out: Margaret Caldwell's question to the postal carrier on that final day. "They'll come soon enough, but we'll be ready." The statement suggests not fear of what the family had discovered, but anticipation, as if whatever forces were at work. The Caldwells had made peace with their role in events. This resignation, or perhaps acceptance, is echoed in the final entry found in Thomas Caldwell's personal journal, recovered from a locked drawer in his desk, before being confiscated by the government representative. What we have discovered is beyond our capacity to fully comprehend. Yet I am compelled to continue. The voices speak of things to come, of knowledge waiting to be found, of doors opening between worlds. I understand now why Edwin hears them more clearly than I. His mind was already altered by his experiences in the war, made receptive to frequencies most cannot perceive. Margaret worries for our safety, but there can be no turning back. We are instruments in something far greater than ourselves. Today, the forests have reclaimed what was once hollow woods. The lumber mill where Thomas Caldwell modified his water wheel for unknown purposes has collapsed into a tangle of rotting timber and rusted metal. The house where a family sat down to a final meal before vanishing into government custody has long since returned to the earth. Only the mystery endures, a whisper echoing through time, hinting at revelations both profound and disturbing. Perhaps it is best that some mysteries remain unsolved. As Thomas Caldwell himself wrote in that final ledger entry, "We stand at the threshold of understanding. God help us if we are right." In the dense woods of the Ozarks, where shadows seem deeper than elsewhere, and silence carries its own weight, there are still those who claim to hear strange sounds on windless nights. A mechanical humming like great gears turning slowly beneath the earth, marking the passage of time until some appointed hour arrives. And there are still those who avoid certain remote hollows. Where it is, said the very air seems to vibrate with unseen energies, where watches stop for no reason, where the needle of a compass spins uselessly, and where the mind perceives patterns at the edge of vision, symbols that seem almost, but not quite, familiar. Whatever the Caldwells discovered in those woods in 1907, its echoes continue to resonate through the decades. A reminder that even in our mapped and measured world, genuine mysteries remain, fragments of reality that resist conventional explanation, beckoning the curious toward thresholds perhaps better left uncrossed. For in the end, as Edwin Caldwell reportedly told his physician in those final agitated days, the voices from the whole speak of wonders and terrors in equal measure. The question is not whether we should listen, but whether we can bear what we hear. A peculiar postscript to the Caldwell mystery emerged in 1989, when a retired government physicist named Walter Grayson published a memoir entitled Special Projects: Reflections on 4 Decades of Classified Research. Though the book focused primarily on his work during the Cold War, a brief passage referenced earlier projects that had influenced his career choice. Among these was his first assignment as a junior researcher in 1937, cataloging artifacts from what was described only as the Arkansas incident. Grayson wrote, "Among the items was a device of brass and copper construction, similar in some respects to a radio receiver, but incorporating principles I would not encounter again until the development of quantum field theory in the 1950s. The accompanying documentation, partially in cipher and partially in standard English, suggested the device had been designed to detect and potentially amplify what were termed transdimensional vibrations. Most remarkable were the equations governing its operation. mathematically sound, yet derived from theoretical foundations unlike anything in the scientific literature of the time. I was informed that the device and its designer had come into government custody some 30 years earlier, though circumstances were not disclosed. That brief exposure to something so far ahead of its time shaped my understanding of how much remains to be discovered about the fundamental nature of reality. This passage, though vague, appears to reference the device constructed by Thomas Caldwell and confiscated by government agents in 1907. If authentic, it suggests that the Caldwell artifacts remained in government possession well into the 20th century and continued to influence scientific research in ways that have never been publicly acknowledged. Grayson's memoir received little attention outside specialized circles, and he died in 1993 before researchers interested in the Caldwell case could interview him about this tantalizing reference. Attempts to locate any of the artifacts or documentation he mentioned through Freedom of Information Act requests have been unsuccessful, as our understanding of quantum physics and related fields has advanced. Some aspects of the Caldwell case have taken on new significance. The frequencies beyond normal perception and transdimensional vibrations mentioned in various accounts bear conceptual similarities to phenomena described in certain interpretations of quantum mechanics, particularly those involving multiple dimensions or parallel realities. Could Thomas Caldwell, through some chance discovery in the woods of Arkansas, have stumbled upon a natural phenomenon that manifested effects only later understood through advanced physics? And if so, what implications might this have for our understanding of reality itself? These questions remain in the realm of speculation, but for those who have studied the Caldwell case in depth, one conclusion seems inescapable. Something extraordinary occurred at Hollow Woods in the autumn of 1907, something that continues to defy conventional explanation even after more than a century. Perhaps someday, as our scientific understanding advances, or as government archives are further declassified, the full story will emerge. Until then, the Caldwell mystery stands as a reminder of how much remains unknown, even in a world we believe we have fully mapped and measured. For those who venture into the Ozarks today, particularly to the remote areas where Hollow Woods once stood, a word of caution might be appropriate. Listen carefully to the silence of the forest. And if you should hear a strange mechanical humming or glimpse unusual symbols carved into ancient trees, remember the fate of the Caldwell family and consider carefully whether some discoveries are better left unmade